for spending your time to learn what is design thinking. I'll try to make it not very long. So if you have any questions, we can answer them at the end. Just write them down and we will try to answer them. I want to start with my personal story of the moment I discovered what design thinking is. So I was on this date. It was some time ago, so before Tinder. It was not like a Tinder date, but that's another story. Um, anyway, so I was in this date with this guy. He was a mechanical engineering, and he was telling me what that's all about because I didn't know what that was. And then I told him I was a designer, and he replied, "Oh, I know about that. I know about design. So when I'm designing a metal piece, for example, for a mechanical system, I can do all the math calculations and I calculate the tolerance of the material. And then once I have all the numbers, there you go. That's the design." And I was like, "Okay, but that's not the design I do." And he was like, "Oh, okay, because you make things pretty, right?" But no, I'm not making things pretty. I do solve problems and I do solve complex problems. But at that moment, I didn't have the words in my mind to make the point. It was only after a few hours later that I realized, oh, okay, so the difference is the users. So when you're designing a piece of metal, you can predict everything. You can predict how the material will behave under the heat or under the pressure or inside the mechanism. But then when you're designing for people, I mean, we are humans, we are unexpected, we have feelings, we have behaviors. So it's not that we can predict what's going to happen. And this is basically what design thinking is about. It's about designing for humans. And it's not something new that just came from Silicon Valley. It actually has been there for a long time. Like there was this book in the 60s that compiled all the kind of methodologies and processes that engineers and architects were using to design for the people. And this guy used this word, and this is where it comes from. And it's still useful today because we design a lot for people nowadays, and it's still useful. I know definitions are very boring, but I couldn't help bring one to you, so I will share my screen. Okay, yeah, I think you can see my screen now. Yes, so I have a definition for you. There's a lot of them on the internet, but this is one I like. So design thinking is a user-centered process to solve problems creatively. So that means whenever we have a problem that involves a user, we can use design thinking. And it also says that it's a creative problem solving. And why is this? Well, since people is not predictable and people is complex, probably if we just jump to the first solution we think about, it's probably not going to be the right one because we can't predict how people will react to it. So design thinking helps us be more creative. And one of the ways it helps us to do that is pushing us to move from the solution mindset to the problem mindset. And let me explain you this concept with a quote that was attributed to Henry Ford. I was trying to find if this is true that he said this. I couldn't find that information, but anyway, let's just use the quotes to understand the concept. So it says, if I would have asked people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses. So what can we take from this? If we said we need a faster horse and we want to design a faster horse, we can be very creative. Like we can think about changing the DNA of the horse so it has 6 legs, or I don't know, put roller blades on the horse, whatever. But we will always be locked into the horse world. That's like the solution mindset. We already have a solution. Whereas if we change to the problem mindset and we define a problem, like I need to move faster, then we can think about some other unexpected solutions. Like we could, I don't know, think about a magic boot or a magic robot that teletransport us or something. I don't know. So yeah, that's one of the things I love. And the process basically looks something like this. So it's a 5 stages process where we first empathize with the users so we understand who they are and which are their problems. We define the problem. We want to solve the problem that it's meaningful to solve. Then we can come up with all of the ideas. And at the last part, we prototype the ideas and we test them. Inside each of these phases, there are different exercises we can do. And which exercises we do or how we do them, it's very, very flexible. So it changes a lot from project to project and from person to person. So yeah, it's not like completely 100% well-defined. And it's very easy to explain like this in a linear way, but actually it's more like this. So you're jumping from one stage to the other and you're doing like iterative loops. So to see this, let's use a real example to understand all these stages. So this company, One Medical Group, they have a network of medical facilities in the US and for primary care, and they were growing a lot and they wanted to have more users. And since their young users were starting to have kids, they thought, well, the next step could be to offer family care, so to welcome as well kids and families. And they had a challenge, how to turn these really fancy offices for adults into offices that will welcome as well kids and families, and everyone will have a good experience. So since people, we are complex, they decided to use design thinking. So in the first stage, they empathize with the users. They wanted to know who they were, which ones are their problems. And there are different exercises we can do to do that. One you might be familiar with is the interview, which is just going with the user and talk with them. But it's interesting to note that sometimes as people, what we say, it's not the same as what we do in the end. So another exercise that's interesting, it's to go to the actual context of the people and see how they behave and how they react, how they feel, just to observe them. And in this case, in the case of the clinic, by observing the families, they could tell they were very active. So kids wanted to play all the time and were moving all the time. That's one of the biggest insight they got from observing these families. And with this information, they moved to the second stage, which is defining the problem. In this stage, you basically take all the information from the first one and you analyze and synthesize it for a problem statement. And what is a problem statement? It's just, defining the problem that it's meaningful to solve for the users. There are different ways we can do this. User stories, you might be familiar with those. There's another way of defining a problem, which is the how might we statement. So in this case, the clinic, they said, okay, so how might we adapt the space so kids can be active? And note here that we are not saying how might we have toys inside the consultation or how might we have a playground, so we don't get locked into a solution already. So we want to open up our minds to other possibilities. So they had defined the problem they wanted to solve. They could move to the next stage, which is one of the funny ones, ideation. So ideate means not just jumping into the first solution. So try to explore other solutions. Try to go past the obvious, because, well, if we as people, we are not obvious and we are complex, probably the obvious solution is not going to work for us. There are a lot of design thinking exercises that will help us think outside the box and push us to think about more solutions. One you might be familiar with is the brainstorming, which is basically everyone coming together. So the people who is designing or the people who's working on the project coming together and trying to come up with as much ideas as possible without judging them. And yeah, trying to produce more and more to try to pass the obvious ones. So you can do different exercises, and at the end you will have a lot of different solutions or ideas, good ones, bad ones, I don't know, crazy ones, probably. What do you do with all of those? You can prototype them. Prototyping is making a rough representation of your idea. And why this is important? Because you make your idea more tangible and more specific, so you can share it with others, and you can get feedback, and ultimately you can see if you're going in the right direction and if if your idea makes sense. And here in the planner, we use a lot the Figma prototypes, right? To prototype the screens and the interactions. But actually, you can prototype anything you want. You can prototype a physical product, you can prototype an experience, you can prototype a service. And in the clinics, they actually prototyped a full doctor clinic to test their ideas. And how they did that, because a prototype is supposed to be something quick and cheap. So they built on top of what they had. So they took one of their medical clinics they already had, and one evening they just changed everything around. So they moved the furniture, they put some props, they even had a script for the nurses and for the doctors and everyone working there on how to welcome the kids and how to treat the families. So they could make it tangible, all the ideas they had. And now that they have the prototype, they move to the final stage, which is the testing, the moment of truth. So if you're designing this small piece of metal we were saying at the beginning, you probably don't need to test it if you calculate the strength of the materials. But with people, you really need to test if what you think, it makes sense for the people. So it's just basically putting your prototype in front of the users and seeing how they react, if they understand it, if it will solve their problem. And this is what they did in one medical group. So they had the prototype ready and the people started coming. So all the families with the kids, and a lot of their ideas about putting areas for the kids to be active, they worked great. But the moment that families started to enter into the clinic, they saw they were packed with stuff, like with trolleys and food and with the nanny, with the grandpa, and I don't know, the clothes for changing the baby later. So they were really packed. And they discovered that the entrance, the corridors, the waiting room, they were not prepared for the people to come like so much packed. Imagine what a waste if they would have built the whole clinic only to discover afterwards that they needed like wider corridors or stuff like that. And this is another example to see that sometimes what people say is different from what they do. Because I imagine if you ask a father of a family or a mother of a family, if they carry a lot of things, they'll probably say they don't, because for them it's like the basic things. But then if you compare it with a normal adult, it is a lot of things. So this is the big learning they had in this testing phase. And as we said, it's like a design thinking is an iterative process, and the testing is one that feeds the other stages. So once you test, you can empathize again with users. You can see if you defined well the problem, or you might want to define another problem. You might come with new ideas as well when you see the users using your prototype. And while the most common loop here is that you see that something is not working, you go back to the prototype, you fix it, and you test it again until you have something more validated, let's say. So this is the whole design thinking process. As you can see, well, it's flexible and it's broad. And here in the planner, we don't talk much about design thinking. We talk more about design sprints. And you might be thinking, okay, so what's the difference? So let me tell you the story about the guy who wrote the sprint book. This guy, Jake Knapp, he was a designer working in Google Ventures. And he was helping a lot of startups to validate their ideas and to launch products to the market quickly. And he was obsessed with processes. So he wanted to find a process that he could replicate for every startup that he was helping to validate ideas and to launch them to the market. So based on design principles and design exercises, he came up with this 5 days recipe, which is like a step-by-step process to compress all the design thinking phases into just 5 days. So that's basically it. And this is why it's so popular, because it's so very well defined. Like he even defines the color of the post-its, the time for each of the activities, the length of the coffee break. So you just need to basically take it and apply it, and it really works well. There's also a different version of the design sprint that came afterwards, like the design sprint 2.0 or the remote design sprint. But basically, that's the idea. It's like it's taking the design sprint bigger concept and making it like a step-by-step thing to follow. Okay, so how do I stop sharing? Okay, stop sharing. Yeah. So that's basically an overview of design thinking and design sprint. So I hope you have a better idea of those. But what I don't want you to think is like, okay, this is a cool thing, but it's like a product designer thing. Because if there's only one takeaway I would like you to have from this talk is that you can use design thinking even if you're not a product designer. And why is this? Because you can use it for anything that involves people, any problem that involves people. So maybe you want to improve a recruitment process, or maybe you want to improve the workflow between teams, or to fix a communication problem you have, or to communicate better your brand. So there's a lot of things you can do with it. And even if you're not working on a big task, like on a big project with users, and you are just doing a small task or even a piece of code, I think it's a good thing to have the design thinking always in the back of your mind as a process. So at any time, you can just stop and ask yourself, did I empathize with the user? Because we share a lot of the stories from users, so we can always hear these stories from other people in the company. Or if we're stuck solving a problem, we can always just ask ourselves, like, is this problem well defined? Or am I in the solution mindset already? We can always try to push ourselves to try to find more than one solution than the obvious one. And whenever possible, we can always try to see if there's a way of prototyping and testing the solution we are working for. And this is something that will help us all to be consistently more creative and have better ideas on a daily basis and help build better products. That's it. Thank you. And now if you have any questions.
Good as always.
Thank you. Any questions? No.
Are you applying this design thinking in that super strict way when you are working in, for example, in your product team?
When you do the design sprint, then you tend to be more strict because it has like the steps and, you know, like kind of it's defined, so you're more strict. But then no, because it's more like a process philosophy kind of broad, and the exercise you use are very flexible. So depending on the project, you might need to focus more on one stage or do more one type of exercise or another. So no, it's very flexible. You always try to cover, you always need to cover all the flow. So from empathizing with the user, you could do something small to empathize, but you always need to do that and test and everything. So yeah, you can apply it very, very flexible, but always covering the whole thing.
Okay. Thanks.
Yeah. Well, I hope you liked it. I didn't want to make it very long.
Maybe not a question, but a comment on my side is
Sure.
I used to hate design thinking when I first learned about it, because I thought it was really not compatible with this iterative mindset that we have.
Mm-hmm.
And then I understood, and you may correct me if I'm wrong, that there are some people that go through the process and take like 6 months, because you have to do the proper research. During 2 months, you empathize, then during 2 more months, you do something else, and so on. But it's actually not the case. And I found this horrible drawing from Gardner. You should never let Gardner do stuff. Let me see if I can share my screen. This one. So they created this.
Okay, yeah.
It makes me puke every time I see it. How to combine design thinking with lean startup and agile. And then it's waterfall to the extreme. So you start with empathize, and you define, you ideate. When you have the idea, then you start the lean startup kind of things. And then when you validated everything, you start building it with agile. So At that point, I hated it, and then I understood that this is not how you should combine, but you should do rapid cycles of empathizing, prototyping, go to the user's test. This can be defined as lean startup experiment and develop using Agile. So it's actually the same thing combined all together. And then I reconciliated myself with design thinking. I don't know if I destroyed the idea in the process or not.
No, you didn't destroy it totally. And from my personal experience, as I see it, one thing is like even design sprint 5 days, and even with a small task, I found myself sometimes just doing the process in you can do it in just 1 day. Okay, I have this problem. Let me empathize. I just have some feedback. So reading a feedback, I'm empathizing. Just asking, okay, what's the problem I want to solve? It's this one. Okay, let me just try a couple of ideas. Let me ask for feedback to someone, and let's do a quick prototype. Maybe you can just do that in 1 day, and you're following like the whole thing. It's more like a philosophy. It's not that you need to really go deeper.
Mental state in the right moment, so you don't
exactly
have before time, or you start mixing solutions with empathize and design and so on.
Yeah.
Nice one.
Cool. Okay. So yeah, nice. Okay. Silas again. Well, thank you everyone for coming. I don't know.
It was interesting, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Really.
If anyone wants to know more, I can share like YouTube video channels that are interesting just to watch and to learn more.
Actually, now that you mentioned, I will try to use it in the recruitment process. So I will try to get more information from you.
Cool. Yeah, sure. Sure.
Thank you, Junkar.
Okay. Thank you guys for coming.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Have a nice
Bye.
day.
Thank you. Ciao, ciao.
Ciao.